Right, so we're just coming up to 1:30, so I'm going to make a start. Thank you everybody for coming along to this talk on mobile learning. My name is Alex Mackman. I'm the technical director for a company called CM Group, whose primary product we trade using the name Agylia. I'm going to be talking to you today about, first of all, can everybody hear me okay at the back? I'm getting a bit of hit and miss. Yep, okay, good, thank you. So I'm going to be talking to you today about the experiences that we've had over the last few years implementing mobile learning programs in a variety of different customers. What we've found, though, with mobile learning is that these particular areas around induction, compliance, and performance support have really been the ones that I think have had the best uptake and the best success, if you like. In terms of my agenda, I'm going to be talking very, very briefly about why mobile. You know, four years ago, back in 2012, when we first really started working actively in the mobile learning space, there was still a lot of, well, should we, shouldn't we, do we really need to? I think now there's broad acceptance that, yeah, it's, you know, any sort of solution in the learning technology space moving forwards needs to have mobile as a fundamental part of it. But the question now really is, how do we go about doing it? What are the scenarios that work best with mobile? And technically, how do we go about achieving it? So that's really what I'm going to focus on, looking at a number of different scenarios, as I say, I'll share some case studies with you. And then I'll end my session with a sort of a checklist of things that I would suggest that you might want to consider if implementing a mobile learning aspect to your learning program. Our stand, incidentally, is right behind this theatre here, so if you want to see more about our products, hear more about what I've got to say now, please come and join us on the stand afterwards. So, without a doubt, users are demanding mobile. As I say, I'm not going to dwell on this because I think everybody accepts now that mobile is pervasive. I mean, it was last year for the first time that mobile access of the internet exceeded desktop access. And that's what these figures from Ofcom are demonstrating. You can see growth, big growth year on year for smartphone access to the internet, and also tablet growth, while at the same time laptops and desktop usage has been going in the opposite direction. And it was last year, as I say, that for the first time over 50% of all internet access now is from mobile devices. So the scenarios I'm going to be talking about, I have slipped an extra one in here around augmenting formal learning, the use of blended learning with mobile. Because it's been quite interesting this morning on the stand. I've been talking to a lot of different people who've been coming up and asking about blended solutions. How can we get the most out of mobile, and how can we use that to augment our formal learning programs? So that's where I wanted to begin. And the way I describe this and how effective really it can be is to show this forgetting curve, as we call it. Just, can I have a quick show of hands? How many people have seen this forgetting curve before? Okay, yeah, a good, reasonable number there of people who'll be familiar with this. Basically, what this is saying is that there comes a point in time, once the learning journey has been completed, that unless you get an opportunity to put what you've learned into practice and you start practicing it on a regular basis, then there is a very steep forgetting curve. This is just what happens. I'm sure you've all experienced it. You've been on a training course, you've not had an opportunity to put what you've learned into practice. 6 weeks down the line, you know, you're kind of forgetting a lot of what you learned in the first place. Now, the steepness of the curves here can be influenced by the spacing of the learning interventions in the first place. And what I mean by that, if you look at this curve here, where we've got a more spaced set of learning interventions leading up to this point, because there's been that longer period of time where the learning's been put across, then that will minimize the steepness of the forgetting curve, as opposed to a more short and sharp learning cycle, and then we find a more steep forgetting curve, so you forget stuff quicker. But where mobile learning can be particularly effective is in addressing this learning curve. So after the formal training intervention, you know, which may have been an online series of classes, could have been classroom-based training, whatever, from that point, that's one of the areas now where mobile learning comes into its own, because you can deploy out nuggets, bite-sized pieces of information, maybe some quizzes, some assessments that relate to the body of learning that you've just undertaken. And by doing that over a period of time, you can keep that knowledge fresh in people's minds. So you can help negate the effect of this learning curve, this drop-off, forgetting curve rather, I should say, that traditionally happens after the learning interventions have ceased. So we have a number of clients having good success in this area, and it's about being able to push out content to mobile devices at regular intervals, and things like push notifications to let people know, remind them when new content becomes available. All of those techniques can be effective. But this is a very good example of where mobile fits well in terms of a blended program. Although I've not got a slide on it, the other scenario that we've used quite effectively is being able to level set prior to running a class. If you want to send out, for example, pre-course materials to get everybody up to a certain point of understanding before you start teaching people, then mobile can be a very effective way of doing that by pushing out, this precursor information to their smart devices, to their phones, to their apps before they come on a class. And at least then you've hopefully got more of a chance of having an audience that are leveler in terms of their background knowledge and what you kind of want and expect them to know before you start teaching the class. So before and after these formal training programs can be very effectively dealt with using mobile. So moving on from that scenario to performance support, this is another quite prevalent example really of where a lot of companies have had a lot of success with the use of mobile technology, mobile learning. And here we're talking, of course, about improving skills and learning while on the job. So it's really about providing just-in-time information at the point of need when the learner or the employee, the staff member, whoever it might be, needs information. It's about providing that information at the point of need. And again, mobile can be very effective as a vehicle for doing that. So the sorts of digital asset that we might be considering here: videos, very effective when delivered to mobile. That's a good form factor. But also things like reference materials, checklists, procedures for field engineers, for example, out in the field. Mini apps even, I'll discuss a little bit about that. We did some work for the Royal Bank of Scotland where we were using mobile to push out training materials, but they wanted to go a little bit further than just educating their audience. They wanted to give them the tools to actually put what they learned into practice. So we built some calculators, some taxation calculators it was actually, being in a sort of financial world. But there was the content which kind of gave people the background. The content was targeting new business owners, small business owners, people who won't necessarily know the ins and outs of taxation laws and how to perform paternity and maternity calculations. So we provided the content to mobile, but alongside the mobile platform, we also delivered little mini apps, performance support tools, if you like, that allow people to actually go in, plug some figures in, and get the calculations out. So here's an example of where we were pushing out educational material, but also through mini apps, we were providing sort of in an integrated fashion the tools that were needed to support people in the jobs that they were doing. And in this case, it was new business owners, and it was about rates of pay, calculations, sick pay, maternity, and tax. It was around those things. So that's kind of an interesting one because it went beyond just the pushing out content from a learning perspective to also pushing out tools using the same platform for delivery and getting those tools into the hands of the end users. Performance support is fundamentally, of course, about helping users find what they want when they need it. So I would argue that contextual relevance, making the content relevant to the individual at the point of need, is arguably more important than having pixel perfect content. Yeah, you want a good user experience and you want your content to look the part. Don't get me wrong, of course that's important. But having contextual relevance to what they're doing when they need that information is equally as important. So the way that you organize the content, the way that you make it discoverable through search, through tags, through filtering, these are all important things. So you can have the best content in the world, but if people can't find it when they need it, then it's not of a tremendous amount of use to people. So discoverability is very important. And also, when considering mobile, in my view, mobile it's fundamentally about being able to go offline as well. So, have the content held locally on devices. And I know there's lots of companies now starting to do that with mobile, allowing the individuals to download information and have it cached locally. And that's great. And a lot of solutions now have the ability to continue tracking how the learners are interacting with the content while they're offline, and then having the tracking data synchronized back automatically to the server. That's all very good and very important. But there's another caveat that you need to bear in mind when you're allowing people to cache and download content locally onto their devices. There's a security question, which I will come on to, but there's also the question of keeping content up to date. Because it's very easy to have people, if you're not on top of this, looking at old, out-of-date content. Now, in some industries, that's very important. They've got to be looking at the latest regulations. They've got to be looking at the latest product information, the latest pricing information, whatever it might be. And when you've got content offline, you want a way of knowing that you can update that content remotely. And push notifications are quite a good way of doing this as well. I'm sure you've all got smartphones. You're all familiar with the push notification style of alert that can come up, even when you're not running the mobile app. Need to use that properly. There's a lot of guidelines around when and when not to use push notifications because, as I'm sure a lot of you will be aware, they can become quite an irritant. And the last thing you want your end users to do is just switch them off, which of course you can do for any app. You can just switch off push notifications. But if you use them well and you use them appropriately, they can be quite effective. So when content is updated, for example, sending out that push notification just to let people know that there is some new regulatory relevant content they need to be aware of, and then they can pull that down. That will replace the content on the device, and you're ensuring that way that people are kept up to date with the content that they've got held locally. Just one example case study that I wanted to talk a little bit about was one that we did for O2 Telefónica, where we built a set of apps for them for the major platforms, iOS, Android, and in their case, Windows. A lot of what we do app-wise is for the BYOD, the bring your own device scenarios, where companies want end users to use their own devices. And by far and away, we're talking about Android and iOS devices, iPhones and iPads, etc., as the dominant market players. Windows, though, still important in enterprise scenarios. And certainly Telefónica used Windows devices quite a lot. They went through a phase of handing those devices out to their employees. And I think Microsoft and Windows, although in the consumer space, they've missed the boat. They're behind on that front from a mobile phone perspective, as I'm sure you probably read in the press. But they're still have quite a presence technology-wise on phones, on tablets, in the enterprise. So the apps that we have on what we call native apps that work very nicely on each of those operating systems. And we still get a lot of interest in our Windows apps, but mainly for tablets as opposed to phones. But with this O2 Telefónica sample, basically they wanted to push out lots of different types of digital material, not just courses that were built using HTML5. They actually authored these themselves using their own authoring capabilities, put those onto the platform to provide slightly more larger courses. I wouldn't say they're full-blown courses because this is mobile. You really don't want your half-hour, your 45-minute, your 1-hour piece of online training, not terribly appropriate on a mobile phone. They were looking at building, and they built a series of small assets using HTML5, which were delivered through the platform, but also they built and delivered resource libraries using PDF and video as well, which is very effective. One of the other little innovations that they had, as a company, they made quite extensive use of QR codes, which are these little sort of graphics you see here, sort of three-dimensional, well not three-dimensional, two-dimensional codes, a bit like barcodes, do the same thing. Basically, there's a code behind that. Not too many companies, in my experience, are using those, but Telefónica were quite extensively. So we built a QR scanner into the app so that the user can scan a QR code and get the content relevant to that QR code. So this was more than just scanning a code and going off to a website. This was about scanning a code and having the information downloaded to the phone at the point of need. So Telefónica, for example, in their meeting rooms, they had little QR codes by the doors of all their meeting rooms. So if you're a new employee, new to the environment, you're not sure what the protocol is for booking a meeting room, for organizing a lunch maybe for a day-long session you're having, Well, you could bring out your smartphone with your app on it, scan the QR code, and have the contextually relevant information delivered straight to the phone, and then you've got it for reference purposes. So that was just a little bit of an extra innovation that we built for Telefónica. And as I say, we've used it elsewhere, but really depends on how a particular company uses QR codes and whether they use them or not. So moving on to compliance, because I've got to be aware of the time. We've only got a half-hour session. Incidentally, if any of these scenarios look of interest to you, as I say, I have all of these apps. I have all of the case studies. We can talk about them more at the stand afterwards if you'd like to. But I want to move on now to look at another mobile-centric example of an implementation we did for the Foreign Commonwealth Office, which started off actually targeting their consular staff. Now, these are staff members who work for the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and they're distributed all over the globe, as you can imagine, in various different regions, with, at the end of the day, varying bandwidth, shall we say, to the internet. In some places, they had no connectivity, or they had sort of very, very limited connectivity. So for them, mobile was a key important requirement, because they wanted to put content in these people's hands, but make sure that it was always accessible, irrespective of the type of internet connection they had or maybe didn't have. So this was a blended solution that used online delivery as well as mobile delivery. And again, the apps were made available for, there was no Windows in this scenario, Windows phones, because they wanted Android and iOS to be the two predominant platforms. So they had both of those apps. It was a combination system, so you could still access all the same training resources on the desktop if you have a connection, if you happen to be in your office with your laptop with connection. But if not, then you have the mobile solution. And although it's a little bit obscured, there's a phone picture and a tablet picture down there, all presenting a similarly branded interface, but giving you that critical offline capability. So through this, they delivered a program of mandatory compliance training, just-in-time reference resources, a whole number of different things. Initially for consular staff, it's now being widened out to all of the Foreign Commonwealth Office. There's a lot more people throughout that organisation now coming onto the system. And I don't know how much time I'm going to have to talk about security, but as you can imagine, the FCO are a very security-conscious organisation for obvious reasons. And so we actually enhanced security of the solution in a number of important areas, including the mobile devices, but also the back-end cloud solutions as well. So a lot of emphasis has been placed for the FCO and for other clients as well on security. So certainly something that's in many scenarios such as this is very important. The platform that we use and the technology that we're using to do all the tracking is based on the tin can as it was codenamed standard. It's now officially called the Experience API. Think of it as next generation SCORM. I'm sure you're probably familiar with SCORM, content for tracking, e-learning, online, running on an LMS. Tin Can can do all of that, but a whole lot more, because you can now start to track content from lots of different locations, whether it be content running inside of apps or on the web or off your hard drive. It really doesn't matter. And you can track, one of the really powerful things about Tin Can is you can start to track activities that are occurring outside of the LMS environment as well. So for the FCO, this is an organisation that is quite hot on the use of coaching and mentoring sessions, one-on-one individual sessions, and they wanted to be able to record those sessions, both from an instructor delivery perspective or a coach perspective. The coach wanted to be able to record the coaching sessions that he or she was taking part in, and the individual learners also needed to record the fact that they've been through different coaching sessions. And they wanted that to be unified as part of the unified set of learning records that are maintained by the system for the individual employees. So using Tin Can, we extended our system to enable people to track what we call external learning activities, things that are occurring outside of the LMS environment, like I conducted a coaching session, I attended a coaching or mentoring session. These can be recorded, as well as perhaps any external activity like studying a webinar, or even coming to a session like this. You know, you could add this event to your learning record. And Tin Can is the underlying technology that makes that much easier than perhaps it would have been in days gone by. And it lends itself as well, the Experience API and Tin Can, to a mobile disconnected world. You can take SCORM and you can take SCORM content offline and you can resync and do all those clever things. Experience API and TinCan as a modern technology just makes all that a lot easier. SCORM at the end of the day has been around 16 years or so, whereas, and of course it carries a lot of baggage with it, and there's a lot of use cases it doesn't really support very well. So that's kind of one of the underlying technological implementation details, but I wanted to mention it because it is, if you're considering mobile, I'll be very surprised if the solution didn't incorporate the Experience API in one way or another. Induction is the next scenario where we have found a lot of companies have got a lot of good use and a lot of benefit out of mobile and mobile learning. So here we've got a joiner, joins the company at this particular point here, and of course most companies will begin the training programs here. They'll push out e-learning, there may be some classroom-based centralized training that all new staff members go through. But what about this time? You know, from when they were offered the job in the first place to the time they actually join, that could be a month at least, if not more. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to use mobile? Most new employees will have smartphones. Get them to install the app, start pushing out some training before they join the company. So again, they're more prepared at this point, they're more level set at this point for the more formal induction training, which might be happening at that stage, typically will be. And again, the use of native apps, pushing out bite-sized bits of content, just a really good way of getting people oriented, ready to join the company so they're not coming in completely cold. So we have a number of companies that we've worked with that do this type of scenario. And the one that I want to highlight is Microsoft, based over in the US in Seattle. They are using our mobile technology and mobile platforms to do an induction program for new managers who join the organization worldwide. Because as a worldwide global organization, they've got new managers joining all over the place all the time, thousands per year. And traditionally, they would have flown those people to Redmond, and they would have done classroom-based training, which they still do actually to a certain extent. But they wanted to make use of technology, get training out, and also not just make it as part of a new manager's induction, but the HR team who we work with closely to build this app also wants to continue the engagement with those new managers over a prolonged period of time. So not just for their first 6 months with the company, but onwards as well. So when we started this program about 18 months ago, it was all about induction. Whereas increasingly now it's about, well, no, we don't want to stop after 6 months and carry on fostering a community among new managers. So this solution actually included gamification elements as well to add a competitive element. And that's something else we've found. Gamification, or the application of gaming principles to the learning space, works particularly well with mobile to keep people engaged, because what we have found, and we found in the early days, mobile gets everybody excited initially. When they get a shiny new mobile app, they start using it, find it useful to a degree, or a large degree, small degree, whatever. But then how do you keep people coming back for more? How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep that community going? Gamification can work quite well in that type of scenario. And this application, it was based on Windows phones. So the example you're seeing here is a Windows smartphone. Of course, being Microsoft, it had to be Windows-based. And you basically slide the panels across. But what they were delivering was different panels of information. So they were delivering bite-sized videos through the Watch channel. They were providing news and resources and worksheets for new managers through this Read channel. You can add content to your favorites. So there's a favorites feature where you can add the content. And also there was an opportunity to win prizes and actually gain points. So each month, the HR team would push out training around a particular aspect of new manager training. So it might be, handling the difficult employee, or the art of delegation, or whatever it might be. And they would put out a package of things to read and consume, videos to watch. They made heavy use of sketch videos, basically talking heads and drawings. So it was somebody talking over the top of a drawing that was building itself up. Just little 3-4 minute bite-sized sketch videos were inside of here. And then at the end of each month also, they would include a little challenge. So based on the consumption of the content, they would challenge people to see what they actually learned about that particular topic. And depending on how you scored in these challenges, you would earn points. And there was a competitive leaderboard inside of this app as well, which basically showed you on the leaderboard in comparison to your peers, new managers who perhaps joined the organization at the same time. It wasn't a global leaderboard, because it wouldn't be fair to compare somebody who joined the company in January with somebody who joined 6 months down the line. That person in January is going to have built up a a lot of points. So it was the 5 users above and the 5 users below. But nevertheless, that acted as a motivation, as an incentive, because the last thing you wanted to see was when you came into the app, you're at the bottom of the leaderboard. So they kind of encouraged people to make sure that they paid attention to the content. They did these additional quizzes. And Microsoft took it one step further, and they actually integrated the system. We integrated the system for them with an online platform called Tango Cards. So when certain points thresholds were reached on the gamification, on the leaderboard, the Tango Card system would be used to allocate an electronic gift certificate, which would then be emailed to the individual. So you'd get $10 or $20 gift certificates, which you could then spend in on an online store. So they actually monetize the rewards here. That I would say is the only example I have of a company that did that. You've got to have a budget to be able to do that, and you've got to want to do that. But it just shows, yeah, you know, that was another way of incentivizing people, and that went down well. That Tango Cards platform I'm talking about, by the way, as far as I'm aware, is only available in America, not over here. But I'm sure there will be equivalent systems over in the UK as well. So here's the gamification that I was referring to. You can see the leaderboard. You can see where you are on the leaderboard with the 5 below and the 5 above. And as well as allocating points, the system would also allocate badges and awards. So for example, if you got 100% in one of those monthly quizzes, you get a badge as recognition of that. So it was an effective use of gamification to keep that engagement and introduce that element of competition, to keep people motivated, and they found it to be very effective. As I said before at the beginning, I do think that gamification and mobile play very nicely together. An interesting stat from Gartner, they predict that 70% of the top 2,000 global organizations will be using gamification as a primary mechanism for organizational change. So, you know, I've been talking about gamification in the context of a learning and development program. But of course, you'll all come across gamification elsewhere. I'm sure a lot of you got Starbucks cards, earn points, or Costa cards. Your local supermarkets will have points and award systems. This is gamification in action. So gamification is cropping up all over the place, and big businesses, small businesses alike, are using it in different innovative ways. But certainly gamification in the learning and development space, definitely an interesting application of the technology. And on the increase, significantly on the increase. So I've only got another couple of minutes to wrap up, so I just wanted to wrap up with some of the things that I think you need to consider. A little mobile learning checklist that I've put together. As I say, very high-level details at this point. Please do come and have a chat afterwards if you'd like to further the conversation. BYOD, bring your own device support with native apps. Now, just very briefly, there are a couple of different styles of app you can build. What I would say that in this day and age, if you're targeting users' own devices, Android smartphones, iPhones, iPads, the app that you deliver has got to deliver an equivalent user experience to what people are used to. In the early days of business-related training apps, that just wasn't the case. And the trouble is that will immediately put people off. You know, there's certain expectations with the quality of apps that people are used to these days. So your apps need to live up to that. When we started out, started to use a lot of web technology to build and deliver our mobile apps. Very rapidly, though, we realized, as did Facebook, as did LinkedIn, as did quite a few other big companies, actually, that native was the way to go at this point. So rather than building apps using pure web technologies, these are apps that are built using the SDKs, the software development kits that are available on the platform. So an Apple app will run on an Apple device. An Android app runs on the Android device. It gives you advantage. You can tap into the underlying power of the platform. You can make sure you conform to all the gestures and the user experience intricacies that you want to, given the platform. So when talking about apps, I always talk a little bit about the importance of native apps to get that user experience right. And user experience being the second point. Of course, the content you then put into those apps, that is another challenge, and that has to be got right as well. But if the app framework itself doesn't give you that, then that's problematic. Offline content consumption, you know, I've come across mobile apps that don't have an offline capability, and to me, they're not mobile. You've got to be able to go offline so your learners can study on the plane, the train, on the commute, where they haven't got connectivity. In the case of the FCO organization, in far-flung parts of the world where there isn't a good broadband connection. Delivering multiple asset types as well. I don't think it's all about e-learning content pushed to mobile. That's not, in my view, that's not what it's about. You want to be able to look at the asset types, push individual videos. We're doing more work actually at the moment around interactive video. Really interesting form factor for mobile devices, because video is inherently good on a mobile device. When you start adding interaction to the video, so you can tap on the video to pause it halfway through, ask some questions, dependent on the response that the learner gives you, go off to different places in the video. This is really starting to capitalize now on the power of mobile, combining video with that level of interactivity. I think that's interesting. And certainly some of the clients we're working with are getting quite excited about that. But also, companies have libraries of resources in PDF form, in existing video form. So you want to be able to support that with your mobile solution as well. I would say that's very important. It's not all about building new content. It's about being able to leverage your existing content and pushing that out down the mobile channel. Multiple content sources as well. Being able to pull content from different places. Perhaps from corporate intranets that you've already got set up. We've done quite a bit of integration. I didn't mention the Yammer integration actually that we did with the Microsoft app that I was talking about earlier on. But they had an internal enterprise social network. They use Yammer because they bought the Yammer company. That's the solution they were using. So we integrated the social network into the app as well to provide that additional channel. So it's about multiple content sources. Dynamic content with push notifications, keeping content up to date. Taking content offline, all very well and good, but you've got to keep that content up to date and let people know when new updated content is available. Experience API tracking to enable you to get a really rich picture of analytics in terms of how people are using the app, how people are using the content within the app, having all of that working even in an offline scenario. And security. I have run out of time. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but security in the mobile space is an important consideration for a lot of organizations, understandably. So you've got to make sure that whatever solution you go with, perhaps you're doing a small pilot implementation, security is still important, so questions around that need to be asked. Local encryption of content within the app on the device, enforcing the use of PIN protection on the device. So don't even let the app run unless you've got a PIN or fingerprint recognition enabled on the device. I think it's fair to say most people will have anyway these days, but it's surprising, still meet a lot of people who don't. So if that content has your IP in it and you want to protect that, a lot of security questions need to be asked. And scalability and speed of implementation is important as well, isn't it? With the technology that's there today, we're not talking about great long, lengthy implementation cycles. Those examples that I shared with you, they started small and they grew. FCO started with Consular, grew out to FCO. Microsoft started with induction, grew out beyond induction. And these programs were up and running in a matter of a few months, not more than that, because the technologies and the platforms are there to support that. And of course, providing traditional online support is also important to facilitate access to the same content from the desktop. Okay, well that brings me exactly to 2 o'clock. If anybody has any questions, please come and see me at the front. I'll be here for another few minutes, or come and join us on the stand just at the back there. But thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.